to Man Enough. I'm Justin Baldoni.
I'm Liz Plank.
I'm Jamie Heath.
And Liz Plank.
She got her best orange shirt on today.
Who do we have on the show
Tell us.
Jackson Katz.
Jackson Katz!
An incredible scholar, author, mentor of mine. I know you've read his books as well. A true pioneer when it comes to the work that we're trying to do on this podcast.
One of the OGs. This guy's been doing the work for 40
Iconic.
years.
Yes.
40 years.
Yeah.
And what I love about Jackson Katz is he's a dude's dude.
He's got a great name.
man's
That's
man.
number one. He's got a great name. I love his name.
But he's like, forget about all the stuff that he's doing. If you just met him, you'd be like, oh yeah, that's a man. He's a man. He's a dude's dude. And then here you are, and you hear this man's man talking about the things he's about to talk about. And it's just so cool and so powerful. And he's such a badass. And I got a man crush on him.
The Boston accent has me. It just got me right away. The first time I heard him talk. So.
And after you listen to this, and I hope you listen to the end, Jackson's going to give you a few books that you might want to check out. And I hope you like this very special edition of Man Enough.
This episode is brought to you by Athletic Greens. Our next partner has a product that I use every day. And when I say every day, I mean every day. I actually started taking Athletic Greens because I don't drink enough water and I always forget to take my vitamins. So by putting one scoop in a giant glass of water and starting my day, honestly, with this good habit, makes me feel better about myself, about my life, about my body, about my heart, about everything. So what's in this stuff? Well, with one delicious scoop of Athletic Greens, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, some probiotics, some adaptogens, and all of that will help you start your day right. And to make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you 1 free year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D, something that I need a lot of. We all do in the winter. And 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/manenough. Again, it is athleticgreens.com/manenough to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance.
Hello and welcome back to Man Enough. I think Liz is really excited today. I know I'm very excited.
I'm excited,
today.
but I don't know if I've ever seen Liz this excited.
Oh,
This
So-
is true.
And the reason why is we have a real life superhero on the show today. I think that's the only way to say it. We have a real life superhero, somebody who has impacted me deeply. In fact, the Macho Paradox was, I have to admit, the first book on masculinity that I read as I started to try to understand. The first time that I ever heard that violence against women is a man's issue. And I'm just so happy that this wonderful, beautiful human being has decided to come on the show. Jackson Katz, how you doing, man?
I'm great. Thank you very much, all of you, Jamie, Justin, and Liz. And it's so great to be with you. And I think what you're doing is fantastic. The Man Enough podcast is a fantastic contribution, and I'm proud and honored to be part of it. So thank you.
Liz, can we learn a little bit about Jackson Katz?
So Jackson Katz is a dear friend of all of us. He's been a huge mentor to me personally, and now I'm excited to learn he's been a mentor to you as well. You're an educator, you're an author, you're a social theorist who is internationally renowned for your pioneering scholarship and activism on issues of gender, race, and violence. You have authored numerous articles, which we encourage everyone to go read. You recently wrote a really great one for Ms. Magazine on why abortion rights is a men's issue. You wrote The Macho Paradox, as Justin outlined, Why Some Men Hurt Women and How All Men Can Help. The best subtitle of all time. In your TED Talk, which, like, you're an OG, okay? Your TED Talk, I think, I was trying to remember the first time I saw your TED Talk, and I think it was, like, on a TV. Like, it doesn't make sense, but it was, like, that long ago. You're the co-founder of the Multiracial Mixed Gender Mentors in Violence Prevention program, one of the longest running and most widely influential gender violence programs in North America and beyond. You're a major figure in this growing global movement of men that are working to promote gender equality and prevent violence. And, you know, we are currently in this moment, that is not new, but there are a lot of new things that are happening in regards to reproductive justice and the assault on abortion rights and women's rights. And it's sort of an all hands on deck situation. And that's one of the reasons we really wanted you on this podcast and we want to start with that topic because it's a very important topic, which we haven't really talked about enough, I think, on this podcast.
Just dive right in.
Yeah. There's a 6-week abortion ban in Texas that makes no exceptions for rape or incest. I know women who have been pregnant from rape and incest. It happens. It is absolutely draconian that we would force these women to take those pregnancies to term. And I've said behind millions of successful men, there's an abortion that they had with their partner that they don't regret. You write a lot about how this is a men's issue. You shared in your Ms. Magazine article that between 40 and 90% of women say that their male partner was involved in their decision to terminate a pregnancy. So if men are involved in biologically, logistically, why aren't we hearing from men on abortion rights?
Well, we are diving right in, aren't we?
Yes. No softballs.
This is this is a cold plunge. So boom, here we go. Here we go.
Well, I mean, by the way, can I say I'll answer your question, but just as a framing sort of point, the issues of masculinities and talking about men and men's responsibilities to each other, to women. These are gigantically important issues in the human species. This is not just some esoteric subject matter. I mean, it's fundamental to everything. And abortion rights and reproductive rights, broadly understood, is an incredibly important piece of sort of gender justice and gender equality. And I, as I and others have been saying for a long time, if you believe in democracy, then you believe in gender equality by definition. And if you believe in gender equality, by definition, you believe that women should be able to control their reproductive lives in across the spectrum, not just abortion rights, although that's a part of healthcare. It's broader than that. It's birth control. It's being able to say no and have that no be understood. It's the integrity of in heterosexual relations to be able to make decisions that are equal in when and whether to have sex. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that relate to gender justice and gender equality that abortion rights is a piece of. And yet in the mainstream discourse, that often gets pushed aside. And I think one of the reasons, Liz, to your specific question, one of the reasons why so few men talk about this subject, I think a lot of men don't know what to say. I think a lot of men are supportive of women in their lives, but they don't feel authorized to speak publicly about it. So, for example, if they've been involved in an abortion decision with their wife, their girlfriend, or another woman, or another person, that's not necessarily their right to then talk about it unless they were specifically authorized to do so by the person who had the abortion. And I think that's part of it. I think men are sensitive to that privacy concern. On the part of women. I also think that some men don't feel like they want to infringe on a movement, if you will, and that is led by women in a multiracial, multi-ethnic sense. They feel like, women need to be front and center and women's voices need to be lifted up. And so I think some men haven't figured out how you can both be upfront and vocal and at the same time not crowd out women's voices or somehow impede women's leadership. And so I think a lot of men in the face of these kinds of challenges retreat. And the default is say nothing, just be privately supportive of women. And yet what ends up happening as a result of that is that the men who are not conflicted about this, which is to say the anti-choice movement and the backlash against feminism and against women's rights and women's advancement, they don't have any compunctions about saying any of this. And so the voices that you hear among men, generally speaking, with exceptions, are the anti-women voices or the anti-women's rights voices, which are very loud. And can I also say, I want to say this too. I know that there are people who don't share my political point of view that have, with integrity, what they consider a moral position. And to a certain extent, I respect that. I don't agree with them, and I think that I'll work to my last breath to advance women's rights as I understand them. That includes full reproductive freedom. But I do think you can, with integrity, have a different position around this particular fraught issue. But that doesn't mean that I'm not going to not stand strongly with with women, with other men, and with others advancing this. Because again, I believe passionately in democracy and human rights. and you have to understand abortion rights and reproductive rights within that larger framework. It's not, by the way, it's not a coincidence that the movements for social justice and human rights and the advancement of justice all over the world almost always include a component of support for reproductive rights for women. That's not a coincidence.
Yeah.
And it's also not a coincidence that fascist movements and movements that oppose democracy are almost always opposed to women's rights, and including rights to abortion. The two are inextricably linked.
Is there a so all the ones that you had mentioned, because you asked this question of why oftentimes men are silent, and you expressed, why you think that is, which sounds really accurate. What about the group of men, and I'll put myself in this, that are 100% for pro-choice, that women should control their bodies and reproductive organs and all of this, 100% without question, and also have a moral belief that pregnancy and is, I don't even know how to put it. This is how it's so delicate for me, right? So if my daughter were to get pregnant, and she said, "Hey, Dad, I want to get an abortion. What do you think?" I would 100% support her choice in whatever it is, but I still might counsel her to understand that I believe this embryo is a soul, and it will be a baby, and all of these things. However, at the end of the day of that counsel, whatever your choice is, I will hold your hand and go right with it with you, right? So I'm like, this is a tough one, because if I say it incorrectly, then I'm all of a sudden getting backlash, and I think there's a lot of men that feel that. So then, therefore, we're silent, because how do we have both feelings at the same time?
I appreciate that, Jamie. I think that's well said, well expressed. I mean, I would say that the political question is different than the personal, moral, or ethical choice that you would struggle with, that women, others, men, struggle with around the rightness or wrongness of a certain course of action. The political question is, does the state come in and tell women or others what they can and cannot do with this most intimate personal choice? So the political question is separate from the moral and ethical question. And people can have, there's plenty of people, for example, who are pro-choice politically, who would not have an abortion, and who would not counsel another to have an abortion, but they're not willing to impose that on another person through the coercive power of the state. So the political question is really about the role of the political system and the state, not about the moral or ethical dilemma that people find themselves in.
You're listening to the Man Enough Podcast. We'll be right back. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Is something preventing you from achieving your goals? Is there something interfering with your happiness? I know these are weighty questions, but ones that I think are totally normal to ask. And one of the best things I did for myself was take the leap to talk to someone, a professional, to help unpack all those things, because I don't have to answer those questions alone, and neither do you. So check out BetterHelp.com/manenough. BetterHelp will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist who specialize in things like depression, stress, anxiety, relationships, grief, self-esteem, LGBT matters, and so much more. And they are committed to facilitating great therapeutic matches, so they make it easy and free to change counselors if needed. You can start communicating in under 48 hours. Anything you share is confidential. Send a message to your counselor anytime, and you'll get timely and thoughtful responses. Plus, you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions. Connect in a safe and private online environment. It's so convenient. And the service is available for clients worldwide. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It is professional counseling done securely online. So start living a happier life today. As a listener, you'll get 10% off your first month by visiting our sponsor at BetterHelp.com/manenough. Join over 1 million people who have taken charge of their mental health. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/manenough. All right, welcome back to the Man Enough Podcast.
And I think this is really important, Jackson.
I think so.
And Jamie, thank you for bringing this up. I know that in the past, I was one of the men who stayed silent because I didn't understand. Because I have a personal belief, like Jamie, that at conception, there's a soul. And what I love about the conversation, what I've learned recently, and what you just said, Jackson, is that you can believe that an embryo is a soul. And you can also believe that it's nobody's fucking business what a woman does or doesn't do with her body. Both things can be true. And I think that there's a lot of people who fall into this gray area where they might have moral or spiritual beliefs, and they don't know if they're allowed to also have those political beliefs and stand up for women and their bodies and their reproductive rights.
But I just heard something that I am going to change my mind on right now, or at least moving forward from what was just said. I do have those beliefs, moral compass for myself, but also 100% believe in pro-choice. And I think that because I conflate the two and makes me silent, I'm going to leave my moral belief to myself and my friends and family in an intimate group. But I think my voice only has to be pro-choice. I don't need to say pro-choice and then couple it with, but there's this and this and this, because in some way I'm belittling, it sounds like, or can feel like I'm belittling pro-choice, or my opinion on it, my stance.
And actually, what you are talking about is extremely frequent and we see it in the data around people and their identification as pro-life or pro-choice. A lot of people will think, well, half of the country's pro-life and half of the country's pro-choice. But when you ask people these specific questions, like, would you get an abortion? Like, no. Do you think other people should have a right to have an abortion? Yes. So you are pro-choice. The majority of Americans are pro-choice. And so it's not a gray area. I think we need to talk about this more, because just because I'm for gay marriage, it doesn't mean I'm going to get gay married. I might get gay married because I'm queer, but you can be pro gay marriage. That doesn't mean you're going to get that you're going to make that personal choice.
But it comes down to love too. Like
of course.
Do I want another human being to be allowed to make their own choices and be happy? Like, I think it's also love.
Yes, but abortion somehow, and this is the question maybe that Jackson can answer. Why is abortion so different in that way? Why is gay marriage about love, but abortion is about murder, right? Abortion is we sort of individualize it as another. Because I've been obsessed with how do we have the same kind of success with reproductive rights that we've had with other progressive causes? Because we've been really stuck.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a really complicated. It's an important discussion. The debate about abortion really is a debate about women's role in society, right?
Yeah.
Women's right to control her own body and decision making, men's right to control women, patriarchal religion's role in maintaining certain kinds of male authority over women. And this is a piece of that, because the early pro-choice, advocates and activists were almost all feminists who were trying to advance women's right to control their body, control their reproduction, and as a way to gain full citizenship and full access to democratic freedoms, democratic rights, and they're part and parcel. And then we still have, this is still a fraught subject in our society. Even though some people think it's obvious that women should have the same rights as men, women should be paid the same as men. It's not as simple as that. There's still deep sort of misogyny in our culture. It's deeply unequal in gender terms, regardless of the incredible progress women have made. But I do think the vast majority of people that I know who are pro-choice or who are part of the abortion rights movement are really thoughtful, ethical people who have thought through this stuff and come to the decision of being, pro-choice politically, not because of frivolity or callous disregard for emerging life or the soul that's growing within the woman's body. It's not, none of that. That's total BS. It's like everybody is deeply concerned about this morally, and is this in line with my values? But then, as I said earlier, what we all have arrived at is, okay, knowing that we live in a heterogeneous society with different religious points of view, with different understandings of where the soul resides, or when it is ensouled, when an embryo is ensouled, or whatever however you want to frame that. There's a wide variety of opinion about that, and therefore the state should not dictate one or another point of view based on a certain subset of the population's, ethical or religious belief about that question.
Yeah.
Why do you think, Jackson? Why has this come down to oh, you're not pro-choice, baby killer. Like, why are we here? I guess my question for you is like, is this really, in your mind, about the saving of babies' lives? Because that's the only thing that I hear, really. Like, when I've tried to have similar conversations in private, it's just like, oh, I'm not for killing babies, which really weighs heavy on the other person's heart who's actually advocating for, at least in my case, like for a woman's right to control her body and choose.
Right.
As if, and what hurts when I think about that is like, even saying that, like, are you insinuating that this woman wants to kill a baby? Like, and by my advocating for a woman controlling the right to her body, that I'm a baby killer? And I don't know how these things became conflated. And is this even about protecting babies at this point?
Right. Well, I appreciate that. These are complex moral questions. I would say, I heard a right-wing polemicist say recently, I think he said what a lot of people have been saying and believing for a long time, but it clicked in when I heard him say it. He said, in response to the pro-choice argument that, it's a woman's body, it's her choice. He said, it's not a woman's body, it's in her body.
Yeah.
In other words, she's the incubator of this baby that's somehow apart from her. And so if we're protecting that baby from her, who would be her murderer in that sort of framework. Contrast that with a slogan that came out of the abortion rights movement, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, maybe even longer. Trust women. Trust women. The difference between that is one that's in the first one, the former piece, it's in her, it's not her body, it's in her body, is an anti-feminist point of view. It's distrust women.
I've heard it called like a
host
body or something.
Body. Yeah, I think that's even almost what he says. Just Handmaid's Tale.
Right. So distrust women essentially, because they're going to make a bad choice about this somehow this growing life that's external to her, versus trust women, which is, it is her body, it is growing within her body, and if you trust her to make the choice, give her the resources, give her the decision, give her a range of possible options. And by the way, we don't do that. I mean, again, we could talk about this for the whole, for our whole discussion. There's so many issues here. I mean, like Barney Frank, the former Congress person, used to say, conservatives care about life from the moment of conception to the moment of birth, because if you're not going to provide, child care and natal care and health care for everybody across the board, for poor women, for wealthy women, and everybody in between, if you're not going to provide support for children, if you're not going to have an architect, if you're not going to reduce the military budget and increase the social spending budgets to take care of human needs along the whole life course, then you're a hypocrite if you say you care. Your concern here is for compassionate care about life. And again, how interesting is it that the political sort of alignment is such that the pro-choice side is the ones who are always advocating for human rights, human needs, funding programs, education, healthcare, and the side that's always against that is the one that's trying to prevent women from having right to control their reproductive freedom. That just shows you that it's not really about the fetus. It's about women. It's about a larger sort of political order that is trying to be maintained. I think we're going to still be mired in these discussions for the next several decades.
Yeah.
You are one of the architects of the bystander approach, which is, and I'm going to ask you to talk about it, but essentially is asking on others, and particularly men, to act in a situation of violence against women, but also I think any situation. And that's sort of what we're talking about right now. Like, how can men, instead of focusing on what women can do to defend their own rights, how can communities come together and really center around safety of women, non-binary people, marginalized people? Can you talk about what the bystander approach means? And I would love, you're such a great speaker. You give such great practical advice. And for our audience who is looking, and particularly men who are listening, who are like, how do I be a good bystander? What should they do?
Just talk to me. and
Oh my
Jamie
God, I was
Jackson.
just going to say that.
To forget about the men that are listening. So, no
Give
offense,
advice
men.
to Justin. Yeah.
Jamie and Justin here.
Yeah, we're asking
We're
you.
here. We're asking you.
We're asking, how can we be better at this? Can you give me personal advice?
Okay. Thank you, all of you. And just to give you a little bit of a context. So back in the early 90s, I started a program called the Mentors in Violence Prevention, MVP program. Liz referenced it earlier, that would train initially college male student athletes to speak out about sexual assault and domestic violence and sexual harassment. And my thinking was not that there was a problem in athletics of male athletes assaulting women, although there was such a problem and continues to be. I was thinking, where can we find more men and young men who have this courage and the strength to stand up and speak out and challenge and interrupt other men's enactment of sexist abuse towards women? My thinking was, if we can get guys who already have some status to do it, then it'll open up space beyond the insular athletic subculture. In other words, my thinking was athletes play a role. And I knew this from my own experience because I was a really accomplished athlete as a young man, and I knew that my voice had weight in a certain sense, disproportionate weight because of my athletic achievements. And again, they were pretty humble in if truth be told, but enough so that I knew this would work if we get guys who already have some status to speak out. And so I approached Richard Lapchick, the director at the time of the center, with this idea to create a program. We got funded by the United States Department of Education to create a model program. So we had this pilot idea. The question is, what were we going to say to these young men on college football, basketball, baseball, hockey, soccer, lacrosse, football teams? What are we going to say to them to invite them into the conversation rather than indict them as potential rapists and abusers? And I say invite rather than indict, which is a phrase from Esther Stoller, who's the founder of Futures Without Violence, which is an important organization in San Francisco. Back in the 70s and 80s, when people did what they called sexual assault prevention on college campuses, most of it was organized around this binary understanding, women and men. Most of it was focused on women, and they called it prevention, but it was really risk reduction for women. They would teach women, don't put your drink down at a party because a guy might drop a rape drug in your drink. Look in the back seat of your car before you get in. Hold the keys as a potential weapon. Have a buddy system. All this stuff that women were taught to this day, urban, suburban, and rural.
Mm-hmm.
It's good advice, but it's not prevention. It's risk reduction. And there's an important distinction because prevention means going to the root cause of the problem, and women aren't the root cause of violence against them. And when men were focused on, almost always back in the day, it was as perpetrators or potential. So the perps. So the spirit of the educational message to men and young men was, you better know the law of consent in the state of California or whatever state you live in. You better know that if you're with somebody sexually and you're pushing forward and that person is not necessarily 100% on board and you keep pushing forward, you could be crossing the line into committing sexual assault. The problem with that, and that's true with domestic violence too, if you're getting worked up in a relational context and you're feeling aggressive and you need to figure out how to de-escalate, because if you don't, then you could cross the line into committing an act of domestic violence. The problem with that is that most men and young men don't see themselves as perpetrators. In fact, most men who have committed abuse towards women don't see themselves as perpetrators. On college campuses, the vast majority of men who commit rape don't see themselves as rapists in any way. And so if you're going to go into a room full of men talking about them as perps or potential perps, you've lost a lot of them already because they just disidentify.
Right.
And some resent it, right? Some resent even the implication that just because they happen to be men, they're somehow implicated in the crimes or the abuses of other men. Anyways, the point is, I'm trying to figure out, how do we get beyond this? Because we're at a stalemate. And I'm thinking, okay, I had a professor in graduate school, Ron Slaby is his name, who along with his colleagues was looking at an approach to middle school bullying prevention that moved beyond the perpetrator-victim binary. In other words, instead of focusing on the kid doing the bullying and the kid experiencing it, they focused on all the kids around the kid doing it and all the kids around the kid experiencing it. The goal was to get the kids around the kid doing it, to make it clear to that kid that what he or she was doing was unacceptable, not because they were going to get in trouble with the authority figure, like the teacher or the principal who's going to come in as the external agent of authority and remove the offending party, but because the peer culture was going to police itself. Kids were going to make it clear to that kid, you can't treat kids like this. This is not cool. And in fact, we're not impressed at all by how you're behaving. You got to knock it off. And then you get kids around the kid experiencing the bullying to make it clear to that kid, what's happening to you is wrong. We don't support it. I don't support it. What can I do to help and support you? The beauty of that approach is that everybody in a given peer culture has a role to play. It's not just isolated to the perpetrator and the victim. They called that the bystander approach. And what we did is we imported that bystander approach into the sexual assault, sexual harassment, and domestic violence field. What it did is it gave us a beautiful response to men and young men who would say, this isn't my issue. I don't rape women. I don't abuse my girlfriend. Why are you talking to me? It's, the guys who are doing it, they need some support or they need some accountability. Not me. I'm a good guy. And it gave us a way to say, you know what, that's okay, but it's not really okay. It's not enough. By the way, it's like saying with race, to use the analogy with race, it's like a white person saying, I don't burn crosses on people's lawns. I don't paint swastikas on somebody's mirror on a college dorm. I don't make racist comments. Racism is not my problem. It's like a really simple-minded understanding of racism and white people's responsibility to work against it. And I think the same direct analogy works with sexism or heterosexism. So with men, it's like guys will say, because I don't commit these specific acts, it's not my issue. We have to push back against that and say, it is your responsibility. And one of your responsibilities is to make it clear to the men around you or the young men around you. And not everybody has powerful, charisma. I'm not naive about this. We're not naive about this. But make it clear to the men around you or the young men around you that you're not okay with other men treating women disrespectfully, and not just raping them or abusing them physically, but even the kind of comments, the casual sexism or misogyny, the disrespectful comments that sometimes men will make within male culture with no women present. Again, very similar to if you're a white person and you're hanging out with a group of white people and one or two of those white people start talking, racist commentary about people of color. If you don't interrupt that and make it clear that that's not cool with you, as a white person, your silence is a form of consent and complicity in their racism. And don't we know that racism is much deeper than just individual acts? It's also systemic, institutional, but some of the beliefs that underlie those institutional structures get nurtured and sustained in places like groups of guys, groups of white people hanging out, or in the case of sexism, groups of guys hanging out, playing poker, talking about stuff, going fishing, talking to each other, where if you don't make it clear that that's not, and you're one of the guys, that's not acceptable to you, then in a sense you are part of the problem. Yep. And I think what we're offering men in the bystander approach, and again, I'm just talking about men right now, but bystanders can be women, it can be people who are non-binary. In other words, a bystander is really anybody who's not a perpetrator or a victim in a given context or a given peer culture or community, because you can broaden it out. It doesn't just have to be in a specific moment. It can be in a community. A bystander is really another word for friend, teammate, classmate, colleague, coworker, family member, community member. And, what can we do, those of us who are not directly involved in situations, to support victims and survivors and to challenge and interrupt abusive behavior? But those of us who have influence beyond just being a member of a peer culture, we have even more responsibility. Principals of high schools, coaches, athletic directors, community leaders, labor union leaders, business leaders, political leaders. In other words, in this case, men who have influence. If they're not using it affirmatively and proactively, in other words, they're not speaking out, they're not partnering with women, they're not making public statements about this, they're not mentoring young men, they're not making it clear that this has got to be part of the toolkit that boys need to be provided with, both in families, but also in schools and everywhere else, then in the sense those men are being passive bystanders in the face of abusive behavior. We've known for decades how big a problem sexual violence and domestic and relationship abuse is in high schools, in middle schools, how many kids, by the age of 18, something like half of women who are going to be raped are raped by the age of 18. I'm sad to say. That's astounding on one level. What that means is that a ton of kids in high schools, girls and boys and non-binary people, have already been victimized by sexual abuse, by sexual violence, by domestic and relationship abuse. And yet you're a principal of a high school, but you're not going to talk about any of this, or you're a coach, you're a teacher. One last thing. I understand that some of this stuff, as we were saying earlier, some of the stuff is really intensely political, because if you start trying to talk about some of this stuff, there's resistance. It's not just a cakewalk. part of the reason why it's such a challenge is that there's all these parts of our culture that resist accountability, that resist having these honest conversations, which is why, I'll say it again, what Justin, what you're doing in your book, Man Enough, you and Jamie and Liz are doing in this podcast, talking honestly, as men, in this case of those of us who are men, talking honestly. And Liz's book is, by the way, a fantastic contribution. For the love of men, a fantastic contribution that bridges sort of feminist concern and compassion for women across the, racial and ethnic and sexual orientation spectrum, and concern and compassion for men, which some people see as antithetical, which is ludicrous. And Liz is on the cutting edge in the sense that she's articulating that from a feminist standpoint,
Yes,
that actually
she
concern and
is.
compassion for men, right? Concern and compassion for men is a feminist act, and it's a false dichotomy to say that either you're concerned with men or you're a feminist, which is
Yes.
total BS. Total BS.
Bell hooks.
Yeah, bell hooks. And women of color have been at the forefront. Bell hooks being central among them, have been at the forefront of saying that we can't just throw men out the door, or just, men are irredeemable. That's destructive to, they say, for example, the whole African American community. But in a more general sense, I think it's true across the board. It's true for white guys too. I think, but I think we're at a place in our society where there's a lot of loud voices. There have been for a number of years, which are saying feminists hate men, and if you care about men, you're going to reject feminism. It's total BS. It's like the smartest way to think about it is that some of the best things that have happened to men over the past couple generations are because of feminist women's leadership. And some of the
can you talk more about that?
Yeah.
The history of the men's movement.
By the way, if you're driving, I hope you will listen to this later and take notes.
Yes, because
we're taking notes here.
Oh yeah, there's a lot to unpack and a lot.
I appreciate that you're indulging me. I'm going off on these riffs.
No, that's why you're here.
Yes, please continue.
Yeah, that's why you're here.
There's a thing called the feminist women's health movement, which started in the early 1970s. One of the iconic books that was produced is called Our Bodies, Ourselves, in the early 1970s in my home city of Boston, which is called the Boston Women's Health Book Collective. And they produced this book called Our Bodies, Ourselves. And it was a way to link gender norms and sexism to health outcomes in women's lives, and various ways in which women's health was affected by their subordinate status in sociological terms or in political terms. That plays out on women's bodies and women's health. The women's health movement has been an incredibly important force over the past half century. Well, there's a men's health movement. It's nowhere near as big, but it has its roots in the women's health movement. In fact, some of the major figures in the men's health movement, and when I say men's health, I'm talking about emotional, psychological, physical, sexual, relational health, explicitly credit feminist women's leadership for creating the intellectual architecture, the paradigm, the way to think about gender and its relation to health. And like my example for my friend and colleague, Terry Real, who wrote a book called I Don't Want to Talk About It, Overcoming the Secret Legacy of Male Depression. It was published in 1997. It's like the first major book that was published about depression in men, okay? And Terry Real, by the way, his real name is Terry Real. But if you look at the cover of the book says Terrence Real. Terrence Real doesn't exist as a real person, but the publishers wanted to make sure that people knew a man had written the book. And the name Terry is a gender ambivalent, and they wanted to make sure that men knew that a man had written it. Anyways,
wow.
Terry Real explicitly says that feminist ideas is what gave him the understanding of all of this. And now you have this new generation of men that includes you guys to a certain extent, and even younger, although you guys are pretty young from my point of view.
Not really.
That talks openly about depression, that talks openly about men's mental and emotional challenges. I mean, it's still uphill in a culture that touts rugged individualism as the ideal of masculinity. If you've got a problem, just suck it up. Meanwhile, half the American troops coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan have brain trauma, have emotional problems. The suicide rates are enormous among our warrior class, the ones who are supposed to be the toughest. They're all human beings who are emotionally vulnerable. Anyways, you'll hear men say, well, what about men? What about the problems of men? As if feminists are somehow antagonists to that, or are somehow antithetical to that, when in fact they created it. How about sexual abuse? Okay, and I appreciate anybody, present company included, that is honest about it's really difficult for men especially, but not exclusively, to talk about sexual abuse. So many men are so many adult men have been sexually abused as boys. So many boys are sadly even today being sexually abused, most of the time by men and other boys and men, sometimes by women and other people, non-binary. But who were the first people to talk about men as the victims of sexual abuse? It was feminist women in the 1970s who were talking about boys and men as the victims of sexual abuse, and creating the architecture of support for victims and survivors to come forward, to be acknowledged as having experienced this trauma, that the shame shouldn't be among the person experiencing it. It should be, if there's anybody who has shame, it should be the person who committed the abuse, not the person experiencing it. all of this architecture of support and cultural space that is now there, it's not perfect, but is now there for men to come forward and be supported, was created by women, and particularly feminist women. But when's the last time you heard feminist women credited with creating space for men's emotional support around sexual abuse, victimization? You don't hear it very often. Some of it's just flat out ignorance. I mean, and some of it's malicious, sort of aggressive, anti-feminist, ideology, where some of these men who are part of movements that are seeking to block feminist advances don't want to acknowledge any of this because it steps on their narrative. And their narrative is feminists hate men, we love men, we support men, and especially white men. And, there we are.
And all it takes is that, less than 1% of feminists who, maybe have their own opinions and maybe have had trauma that are very public, for all of the men to say, see, all feminists hate us. It's the same thing we do with everything. It's the 1%. And then we use that to, promote whatever the hell narrative it is. And it's so sad.
And Justin, it's intellectually illegitimate because to say that, I mean, I've been working on these issues for, 40 plus years. And I've never met one woman that I would say is anti-male in the feminist movement. Now, they might exist, and I'm certainly a lot of women who are angry about sexism, but that's like saying, as a white person, have I met people of color who are angry about racism, who are really don't want to deal with, white people at all because they've been so tortured by racism. They just don't have any time for white people. Yeah, I have met those people. Just like I've met some women who are, they don't want anything to do with men anymore. But as a person who has some social advantage, we have to be able to live with that and just say, okay, that's one of the results of the systems of inequality that we have. There's some tiny member of the other group, the subordinated group, that is so angry and so don't want to deal with us. But to say that that's a stand-in for everybody is so ridiculous. It's just it's not credible. And it's a way to not deal with the real issues.
That makes me want to, because you had mentioned that you've been doing this work for 40 years. And I'm thinking
you look
about,
great, by the way, Chad.
Yes, and you made reference that we look young from your point of view. I'm sure we're not that far age difference. What I'm wondering is, you've been doing this work for so long. There are so many young boys, as you keep referring to, that are in school, 13, 14-year-olds. Then we got high schoolers, 17-year-olds and such, and then young men in college, who, as we're doing this podcast, we want to reach men's hearts. And I love also, by the way, how you talked about this idea that a lot of men don't see themselves as the very thing that we also are labeling them as, right? In fact, they are doing this damage, but they don't see it, so we lose them at the gate because they don't then identify. I love that point. My question to you is, and maybe this is personally why you care so much about this. Why have you dedicated 40 years of your life to this? If I'm 18 or 25 and I say, I'm on this brink, I kind of like my ears listening to you a little bit. I'm not really that interested, but I'm kind of, why should I care about this? Other than just wanting to be well-versed in it and why should I really care? Why do you care? Tell me why you care so much so that maybe I can then learn from your care.
Yeah, that's a great question and prompt. Thank you, Jamie. Well, I mean, I honestly, from the time I was a young guy, like 19, I was a sophomore in college. I mean, actually my first year of college, when I was reading and learning and, taking courses, I mean, I was exploring, by the way, for my own personal growth. Like when I started taking courses, my first semester of college, I had been a high school, 3-sport varsity athlete and an all-star, football player. And I was in a small town, suburban jockocracy. So I've heard some of your podcast discussions about, and I've read, Justin's book. I was on the other side. Like I wasn't one of the kids who was, bullied by the jock culture, if you will, as much as I was in the center of it.
You were tying me to the goalpost.
Okay, but in fairness, I wasn't.
Okay, good. Okay, good.
But metaphorically, I love that. I had stuff when I was even younger. Like I was playing out some petty stuff when I was even younger, like at 10, 12. But it was family dysfunction, spilling over, if you will. But but anyways, in high school, I was in the center of that sort of, but I didn't feel comfortable on one level. On one level, I did. I got a lot of, the positives for being successful in that realm, but I was also it was not at all in line with who I wanted to be or who I saw myself as. So when I went to college, I took courses with gender in the topic description, not because I was going in to, help women, like I had some feminist, quest to be heroic, but it was rather, how can I get better in touch with this disjuncture between my private reality, a sensitive, guy, young man, boy, damaged in many ways, and the public self of the football player, the kind of, charismatic guy. How do I get more in touch with that? So I took these courses, and they included literature, feminist literature course, which I didn't know that was what I was doing. I did know that it was gender, but I wasn't like thinking, feminism, this is what it's going to be my salvation. And I started reading women's literature and discussing it, and it was so interesting to me. It was giving me all this insight, both into women's lives and narratives, but then how, feminist writers and novelists and others were thinking about men. And I did have some critiques, by the way, of some of the ways that men were caricatured, because I didn't feel like the complexity of my life was being represented in some of that literature. But I did see that there was a whole way of thinking about gender in a complicated way. And by the way, I was also fortunate at the University of Massachusetts to have professors who were also intersectional before even the term intersectional. In other words, talking about race and gender and sexual orientation and decolonization, because one of the great movements of the 20th century is the decolonization movement of global South countries and community and societies freeing themselves, often in brutal wars, revolutions, if you will, removing the shackles of European, domination. These are titanic things that were happening in the 20th century. And by the way, can I also say, my father was a medic in World War II. I'm old enough so that my father's generation was, World War II. I mean, my father died at age 37 of a heart attack when my mother was pregnant with me. So I never even met my father. But the point is, World War II was not that far. I mean, World War II is the biggest cataclysm of violence in the history of the human species. And I was born 15 years after the German surrender. And one of the great days in human history. Anyways, the point is, it's not that far away. We're not that far away generationally from this incredible, including the cataclysm of violence in the mid-20th century, the decolonizing movements, and then the civil rights movements and the women's movements and the Vietnam War, the anti-war movements. This is all roiling in my psyche in a certain sense. And as a young man, I was like, intellectually, I was very acquisitive and very, I want to learn everything. Give me, read. I mean, I surround myself with books about race and gender and racism and sexism and heterosexism, all of it at the same time. And I'm thinking, I'm a man, I'm a white guy, I'm heterosexual. I happen to occupy certain positions of social advantage. And I'm also in a position, as a result, to do something about all these giant problems that we have. And it was clear to me. And I was filled with change the world energy. Like I was one of these young men in a hurry, like I'm going to change the world. And to me, I saw gender inequality as one of the central injustices in the human species, and it was marbled into every other system of inequality, including racism, and heterosexism. And so I just thought, I just got to start speaking out. And so when I started speaking out as a young guy, I used to write for the school newspaper and a weekly column, and I started student organizations. I started speaking out, and then what happens is when you're a man who speaks out on this subject matter, who comes to you and starts sharing their women start. Generally speaking, I'm not, not all women, but women will start feeling a little more safe to say and talk to you and say to you what's really happening in their lives. And I remember hearing from women around me about how they had to live in the daily reality of fear of men's violence and sexism and everything. I'm just like, this is so messed up. And I knew as a man that I was in a position to do something about it. And then I looked around and I was like, where are the men speaking out? There's not that many. There's very few, in fact. And I was like, this is so obvious a deficit. And I was, again, a pretty confident young man, even though I had my own doubts, and I still do. But I was confident enough that this was right. Like men should speak out. And so I started doing it. And my feeling was, and this is one of the privileges of being a successful athlete, especially in this case, football, it's like I wasn't worried what other men were going to say. And I wasn't like, what are you going to say to me? I'm soft. I'm a wuss. I mean, it's like, to me, that was so ridiculous on its face that it was just like, that's not going to stop me. But I have to say, I'm not normal in that regard. I mean, there's an awful lot of men and young men who see injustice around them. They see sexism. They see ways that men act both individually, but also collectively. And they don't like it, but they don't say anything. And this gets back to the whole bystander thing earlier. It's like, why don't they say something? One of the reasons they don't say something is because they know that there's a cost to pay in male culture if you take a stand on these matters, because other men will police you back into conformist silence. They'll call you soft or wuss or not one of the guys, or you're not playing for the home team, or there's something wrong with you. You're not man enough. And therefore, a lot of guys get... yeah, you're not man enough. And so a lot of guys will, as a result, they'll retreat and they'll be silent and they won't say anything. And I'm convinced this is why it's a leadership issue for me. Leaders are people who take a stand even when it might be unpopular, and a bystander who speaks up, a friend who's, like I always say, a 15-year-old boy whose friend just tells a rape joke, right? The 15-year-old boy, maybe his mother's a rape survivor. And by the way, a lot of 15-year-old boys have mothers who are rape survivors, and they don't even know it because the mother hasn't shared it with them. Anyhow, the 15-year-old boy hears his friend tell a rape joke. The 15-year-old boy, if he turns to his friend and says, "Can you joke about something else? I don't think that's funny. I don't think we should be joking about this," that 15-year-old boy has just executed a leadership protocol. He might not see himself as a leader. He might not have any credentials to suggest that he's a quote unquote leader, but that's a leadership act. Because what he did is he saw there was some kind of harm, thought about his responsibilities to women, to his friend, to himself, to his own moral integrity. And then he thought about what his options might be, and he does it. He executes it. That's what a leader does, isn't it? The friend who says to his friend who's disrespected his girlfriend at a party, who takes him aside maybe later and says, "Dude, you're my friend, but the way you were talking to your girlfriend, I was really uncomfortable, with that, man." That's a leadership act by that friend. It's also a friendship act by that friend, because if you care about that guy, you're going to say something, because you know that what he's doing is harmful, not just to her, but to him, that he's diminishing his own relational success and he's potentially committing crimes and hurting other people. Right? He's your friend. Don't you have a responsibility?
It's the most manly thing we could do. That's the irony. Is the cognitive dissonance of being a boy and a man is that the most unmanly thing we can do, we're told is the most manly. And the most manly thing we can do, standing up for women, right? Taking these leadership roles, takes the most bravery, and we're policed for that and told that it's unmanly.
That's right.
And it makes no sense, right? This idea of like policing to keep us in that box makes absolutely no sense when you actually think about it, because the thing we're most afraid of, Jackson, is going against our own gender. So that would mean it's the bravest thing that we can do.
That's right. And Justin, you're right. You're right on point. But also, I would say there's even more to.
Yeah, take it home. Take it home, Jackson.
Yeah, rich content. I often say, like, if you're a guy, being one of the guys takes nothing special. Just going along with your boys takes zero special. What takes something special is if your guys, your boys are doing something that's wrong, is turning to them and saying, "Dudes, you're my friends, you're my buddies, but that's not cool," because that takes so much more strength. Yet the person who does it gets called soft, or he's not man enough. It's literally the exact opposite of the truth. Yeah. People say, "Well, don't you want men to be strong? Don't boys and young men need to be strong?" And you're saying, and if you hear on, various, right-wing sort of channels,
make men again.
The wussification of America, we're wussifying men, we're wimpifying men, we're making men soft. No, we're not making men soft. In fact, we're making men stronger. And by the way, I want to be strong. I feel like I'm a strong man, or I aspire to be strong. Strength is a good thing. The question is not whether we want men or young men to be strong. The question is, how do you define strength? And if your only definition of strength is your ability to impose your will physically on another person through force or the threat of force, that's a really simple-minded understanding of strength. So we have to expand our definition of strength. It's moral courage. It's social courage. It's being able to say, even when your voice is quivering to your friend, dude, I'm concerned about you because the way you've been acting towards your, girlfriend is really not cool. And I'm really, your voice can be shaken. But that takes strength to do that.
Yeah.
I work with the military. I've been working with the military for 24 years now, all branches. And my program was the first program, domestic and sexual violence prevention program system-wide in the United States military. And in particular, we were in the Marine Corps. This is starting in 1997.
Damn.
And I remember I used to use this all the time, this like sort of little analogy or little story. I would say, think about this Marine who's like a man who's a Marine, who's a hard-charging, kind of tough, taking physical risks on the battlefield in a way that vast majority of us would never even consider doing, right? And I admire that. Physical courage is a form of courage. That same Marine is now back stateside, sitting at a bar, and his friend tells a sexist joke or makes a sexist or derogatory misogynist comment towards women. And this guy doesn't want to say anything to his friend because he doesn't want his friend to think he's soft. The same guy who's like jumping into mortar fire is worried that his friend's going to think he's soft because he said a sexist comment is not acceptable.
So
it's like,
crazy.
Let's expand our definition of strength beyond the most Cro-Magnon battlefield encounter. And if we do that, by the way, what we're doing is we're presenting men and young men with aspirational sort of goals. To be strong means to support women, means to be a man who challenges sexism, a white person who challenges racism. That's not weakness, it's actually strength. And also one last thing, Justin, you had said about like it's challenging your gender or something like being strong for women. It's both. This is why Liz's book is so important. It's not one or the other. It's not like just for women. I don't see like my work isn't just for women. It's for men. It's for everybody. It's like men have so much to gain by all of this. Yeah. I mean, feminism has pointed us in a direction over the past generation, right? That is so life enhancing for men and so relationally connected from men's experience. Like it's I don't see it as just helping women.
No, it's
from the
not.
beginning, it's been helping men. Right.
It can be selfish in some ways because shit, I don't want to suffer the way that I'm suffering.
And your life isn't your life so much better now that you've been doing this work?
Oh, it's night and day. I'm not even the same. Not even the same person. I wish. God, I wish Jackson Katz would have been in my life when I was 16 years old.
Same.
Well, thank you. But can I one last piece of this related point? Violence is a huge force in the lives of men. Now, men's violence against women is itself a huge problem in the world, and it continues to be so. But men's violence against other men is an enormous problem. And in fact, in all the major categories of violence, outside of domestic and sexual violence, men and young men are the primary victims as well as the primary perpetrators. So murder, attempted murder, assault, aggravated assault, gay bashing, bullying, men and young men are the primary victims of all these crimes, as well as the primary perpetrators. And so if we're going to figure out how we can reduce violence, but certainly how we're going to, define manhood, you say undefined, but, redefine, undefined, sort of reconstruct understandings of what it means to be a man such that violence and strength aren't necessarily equated. If we can do that, men will be much less victims of other men's violence. Boys will be much less the victims of adult men's sexual predation as well as other forms of abuse, and everybody will be healthier. And I think this is one of my problems with the so-called men's rights movement is they see feminists as their antagonists. Like somehow feminists are against men or men's rights, and I just don't think I think that's a simple-minded way of thinking. I think it's wrong.
Can you just give us 2 minutes on that? Can you just go into that if you don't mind for just a minute or two? Yeah, because there is this whole sub movement of the alpha red pill men's rights movements that think that feminism is
the reason
enemy.
For all their problems.
Yeah,
women are women is the reason they're in pain.
So I'm just curious, Jackson, if you don't mind just giving us some thoughts on that.
There's been different ways that men have responded to the increase in feminist activism. But this movement, it's real and it's online, and it, I think it creates this unnecessary tension between men and women. And by the way, it's also men who, in particular white men, who are feeling displaced by feminism, by the LGBTQ revolution, who feel like they deserve to be on center stage, but are being pushed off center stage. And I mean, I've always read, for example, Make America Great Again as put white men back on center stage again. And I think what these men are trying to do, what these movements are trying to do, is put the genie back in the bottle. It's not going to succeed because demography pushes forward the culture, and the world is a racially and ethnically diverse place. Women aren't going back into the second-class status. That's not happening. How do you adapt? How do you evolve? To me, that's the question, rather than put your finger in the dike or shovel sand against the tide. So, I mean, evolution, for example, the most successful organisms are the ones who know how to adapt to the changing local environments. That's the ones who succeed, not the ones who try to hold back the tides of history, but the ones who adapt and come up with new ways of being. And I think that generationally, some of that's happening with men. I mean, again, it's imperfect. And I think we have to map individual and personal experience to social policy, because it's the other thing politically. If we talk about this all as a personal issue, like we're like Jamie or Justin or me trying to figure out how to be a better person or better partner or I mean, which is all important, and people want to be happy and people want to be, fulfilled in their lives. I absolutely. But if we don't marry that personal aspiration to social policy and, funding childcare and prioritizing the lives of, mothers and fathers, and so that individuals don't have to figure out how to work alone against these giant systems that make life really difficult, then we're doomed. We're doomed. But I don't think we have to be. But I do think we have to get beyond some of these divisions, like men against women or feminists against, men's rights. I think we have to move beyond those artificial divisions. And again, I think advancing men's lives and men's health means working collaboratively with feminist women, not antagonistically toward them.
Yes, and you did a great documentary called The Man Card, which your bio is so long we couldn't cite every amazing, incredible work that you've contributed, but everyone should go check it out. It's about all the, we talk a lot about gender when it comes to our political system, but you really look at it through the prism of masculinity in men, and there's so much to talk about with that, and not just in the last few years, but you actually look at it in the last 30, 40 years. So it's a very good documentary.
Will you come back and spend some more time with us?
There's so much more I know that we want to talk about, and we need you back.
I'd be more than happy to.
Thank you so much.
I mean, I'd be happy to continue the dialogue. I mean, again, I think what you're doing in your podcast is modeling that men can actually. And Liz, I mean, so I don't mean just say, because Liz's contribution is critical. I mean, can I say there's a thing called standpoint theory? Have you heard of standpoint theory?
No.
Standpoint theory suggests that the perspective that somebody has based on their social position makes a huge difference in terms of what they see, the optics the lens that they look through. So, for example, a woman in a patriarchal society is going to see things, and certainly is going to see things about men that men aren't going to, because, like the saying goes, the fish are the last to see the water. So that part of privilege is that you don't see your own privilege, and so a person who doesn't have that same standpoint isn't going to see the same thing. So, for example, white people, if you're living in a very white community, and a person of color then enters that community, and then you interview, say, that person of color, later in the day, they're going to have some insights in that community that a lot of the people in the community would never even thought about.
Exactly.
And it never even occurred to them because their standpoint is different.
Absolutely.
So Liz's insights, she's going to see things, implications of some of the things that you guys are saying and talking about, or we guys, that we wouldn't even have seen,
Exactly.
But that's not because we're bad people. It's just how it works. And by the way, I do think also, and this is what I think is brilliant about Justin's book, is that when men have read women's writing and feminists had discussions with feminist women and they can see things, we can see things from the inside that they couldn't see because they don't live in our bodies. And I know Jamie and Justin and I have been in parts of male culture that Liz has never been in. You've certainly never been inside a male body, but I mean, even in parts of the culture, in other words, friendships that you have with other men that you guys talk about by the way, you're way ahead of me. Okay, you're way more honest. Your ability to talk honestly and emotionally vulnerable is beyond my ability to do that, and I appreciate that.
Want to trade?
Anytime.
That'd be interesting.
Well, yeah, maybe that
Both
would
are
be
hard.
interesting. But
I
I'm
think
just
both
saying,
are
I think
hard. Yeah.
both are hard. But I'm just saying, I think what you're doing is for men, you're modeling that you can actually talk about stuff that might be scary and might be a little awkward. And a lot of guys are a little bit, but they listen and they hear you saying it, and it gives them at least. I'm not saying it's going to make them go out the next day and start talking about their challenges of feeling, vulnerable or their body image anxiety. That's an important one, Justin. You've talked about that and written about that. I mean, body image anxiety. Tons of men feel like they don't measure up. Literally measure up. Their penis isn't long enough. They're not tall enough. They're not physically powerful enough. They see other men who are kind of like buff, and they think, "Oh, I could never look like that." And it's I don't want to equate it directly with women, because physical appearance for women is much more punished if they're not successful at establishing themselves in the dominant sort of culture's understanding of femininity. But a lot of men do feel inadequate, and a lot of men do feel that they don't measure up. And hearing men talk honestly about that, including men who sometimes from the outside look like they got it all going on. In other words, saying, you know what, I might look like I've got great confidence, but I get private anxiety. I get private, depression. I get private feelings of self-doubt all the time. This is really important. And it's not an act of weakness, as I was saying earlier, to acknowledge vulnerability. In fact, anybody who's been minimally checked in emotionally or been in therapy minimally, I mean, this is not some great revelation, knows that somebody who denies their vulnerability, who just got a complete, like, I've got it under control, is somebody who's literally not got it under control. In fact, is so threatened by introspection that they can't even acknowledge that they might be wrong sometimes, that they might be, look at Donald Trump. It's like Exhibit A. And 75 million people voted for him even after 4 years of his presidency. Others are still invested in this old caricature, what I consider a discredited caricature of certain, manliness. And by creating the space for these kinds of discussions, you're on the cutting edge. So thank you.
Oh, Jackson, thank you. Let's do a part 2. Thank you so much for being here and for coming on. And if you, as a listener, have been as blown away as all of us have, hopefully you've taken notes, not while driving, and you want to learn more about Jackson and his incredible, groundbreaking work, you go to jacksonkatz.com. Katz with a Z at the end, jacksonkatz.com. I'm sure he's got your documentary on there. You got your books, articles, all the things that you do so brilliantly. And we just so appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jackson.
It's what we needed. Indeed. I appreciate your everything that you are contributing to society and humanity. You are going to leave or are leaving an amazing mark on the earth, but you will, in your passing in many, many years to come, leave a huge, incredible legacy. And I think that we'll look back at your work and we'll know that humanity progressed directly because of what you've committed your life to. Thank you for this.
Thank you so much.
And as we leave, for our listeners who love to read, besides, of course, Liz Plank's incredible book, can you give our listeners 3 of your favorite books that are a great jumping off point? And feel free to include one or both of yours in there.
Thank you, Justin. I would say, if you want to learn about violence, read the book called Violence by James Gilligan. He's a former psychiatrist who worked with really deeply disturbed men for over 20 years and wrote some incredible books, including this book called Violence, that explains that shame is at the root of most men's violence, that men feeling shamed and then trying to reclaim their honor, in a sense, through the use of redemptive violence is at the heart of so much of the violence we see. So James Gilligan, I would say that would be one. I Don't Want to Talk About It by Terry Real. It's about men's depression, but it's about much more than that. It's about men's relational health, and broadly understood. Although that's a little more focused on white men, and because I think it's important to be intersectional in the way that we think about men and masculinities. A third one would be a film. It's a documentary film called Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes by my friend and colleague Byron Hurt. And it's a brilliant examination of Black masculinity in hip hop culture and rap music in particular. From a hip hop head, Byron it's a loving critique of rap music, the hypermasculinity and homophobia and heterosexism. But from a loving critique framework, because Byron is an African-American man from New York who loves hip hop, but it's brilliant in a way it makes you think or helps you to think about how media culture and popular music and other forms help to normalize certain kinds of dysfunctional and abusive behaviors, and it doesn't have to be this way. And so I would say those three would be a good start. Oh, one last one, Dying to Be Men by Will Courtney. That's 4. I'm sorry.
Oh, good.
I didn't. Will Courtney is one of the sort of the pioneers of men's health movement, and Dying to Be Men. It's not an easy read. It's a compendium of research and about suicide and emotional health and physical health and heart disease and all kinds of things as it relates to men's gender. In other words, masculinity or masculinities. And Will Courtney is a brilliant and important figure. Dying to Be Men. So thanks for the question.
Great.
And the final question we ask everybody, we should ask you because you're the expert. What does it mean to be man enough?
To be Jackson Katz. Oh, sorry, you have to answer that question.
Synonyms.
What does it mean to be man enough? I mean, I think other people might have said this already, so I'm sorry if I'm not being original. It's really about being a good person. It's not really about being a good man. I think the aspirations that we should all have is to be compassionate, to be concerned with the well-being of others, looking not just our immediate self-interest, but our collective self-interest as human beings. It's being graceful in the face of disappointment. It's about, these are human qualities. These aren't manly or womanly qualities. I think all the qualities that I aspire to, or that I aspire to for the people that I care about, especially men and young men, are human qualities and not manly qualities. So I would say, what does it mean to be a good person enough and a good member of society in the early 21st century, in a human family with enormous problems, and historical problems, from violence to racial and income inequality to climate change and climate crisis. So what does it mean to be a good person is really the question. And to the extent that we can decouple those human qualities from these narrow gender categories, we'll be making forward progress for our species, and it will improve our own personal relationships and lives.
Thank you.
Wow. Well, Jackson, you definitely are human enough. So appreciate you coming on, man.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And,
Likewise.
And we'll talk to you soon. We will be right back. This is Man Enough. Hello, and welcome back to Man Enough. Damn.
That was great. I love how Jamie had a big aha progression moment. This interview kind of changed something.
It didn't
for
change
you.
my opinion about anything.
Yeah.
I've always been in this position of pro-choice. It has changed the way that I will talk about it and deal with it without having to defend or think that I have to then add this piece because I say this piece. As if saying this piece then negates this.
Yes.
It was really eye-opening for me. I can just simply say pro-choice, get the hell out of the way, 100% support women, absolutely, period, and leave it at that. It doesn't, why do I think that it's like, I'm pro-choice to choose religion, right? Believe in God or not. I don't sit there, of course, everyone should have a choice. I don't follow it with, but you should believe in God. Right?
Yeah.
I just say, like, of course, nobody should ever tell someone that they should believe in this and that, allow people to have their choices.
Yep.
So why do I do that with this?
Yeah. Well, I
Why
think
do
it's
I
the
need to-
narrative. I think it's the narrative that's pushed, right? When you talked about like, well, you're a baby killer. It's like,
Yeah.
am I? Like, because it's like, all I'm saying is that other people have a right, that the state should make that decision for you. It's as Jackson put it, it's a very simple-minded, not just simple-minded, it's like a false approach to this narrative. And we accept that framing because it's put upon us, I think, on a minority of people.
Yeah.
Minority of people who want these laws to exist. Majority of people don't. But we accept that framing. And so it seems like you were able to free yourself from that framing and have
agree.
your own approach to this issue without someone else, determining how you feel.
Because honestly, Liz, I have
for
not
you.
posted something like I don't post so much on social anyways, but when I do post, I don't ever post about this because of this
I think a lot of people have that
this intersection of being so.
Yeah.
And part of it's like, of course, I'm pro-choice. I feel free and liberated to just post. I could post and wear a shirt that says pro-choice because it doesn't negate the other.
Yeah,
It doesn't
great.
have to mean that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And it is tricky. It's something I've been struggling with is, as you know, I've recently, I don't know, who knows when this is going to come out, but posted about it. And it also hurts when people call you a baby killer. I'm not going to lie. There's a part of you that's just like, what the? No, I'm not. But like, it hurts that this is what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
That we're like, we're hurting. We're all hurting so much that we're like putting these statements and beliefs on each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not what it's about. I just want everyone to heal. I just want everyone to heal so much.
But we can't heal without doing the work. And doing the work means it'll be painful.
Yeah, and it's more painful for women who are forced to bear children and who
My
are
goodness.
put into poverty as a result of it, right? And again, 1 in 3 women will have an abortion. So every room you've probably been in, there's been a woman who's had an abortion. So
Of course.
I think it's important to remember those statistics.
There's so much that he offered that, we'll have to listen back to it
Yeah.
and reflect on a lot of the stuff. When he talked about just this idea of like, we want to we kind of do it here. We're all about calling in versus calling out.
Uh-huh.
And when him saying something like, if you come to, how did he put it? Trying to bridge this gap. If you come with someone and call them names or say you're this or you say you're that or this or this or this, immediately you lose them.
Yeah.
You are a sexist.
Invite
you're
rather
racist.
than indict. Yeah.
You're whatever these are, because they don't even see themselves. We don't see ourselves as that, and that. So then we disconnect. That was really good, I think, because there are so many people, wonderful people that would care if they could get past that language.
Yeah.
Right? If they don't see themselves as. I do that did that with 12-step program, same thing. I'm not that. Don't call me that. I don't identify with this, and this, and this. As soon as you put that away and go, okay, but I see something else, then you're willing to do the work. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
We got to have him back.
Absolutely. Great
Immediately.
conversation. Yeah.
Immediately.
I think we have him back. I think he should be a standing comeback.
Standing comeback?
Standing comeback.
Hey, I'll go to school with Jackson any day of the week. If you
I'm
like-
sorry you got to deal with this shit all the time, Liz.
Thanks.
Fucking sucks that we're still dealing with this. And it's so 2 + 2 to me. And I don't.
Well, now that it is, you're going to be posting about it all the time, and you guys are going to be taking a stand on this. It's going to help create change.
If you like the conversation, if you like learning with us in real time, where, Jamie, can they find us?
You can find us at all the spots. You can find us on Spotify.
The cool spots.
You can go to Apple, iTunes. You can go to YouTube. You can go to Stitcher. You can go to, where are the other spots? All the
think
cool
that's
spots
it.
that you
Yeah.
find all your great things. And type in manenough.com/podcast. You can find us there as well.
Ooh, you've done this before. We will see you next time. I'm Justin Baldoni.
I'm Liz Plank.
I am. God, right then I wanted to say Jackson Katz, but then in the midst of it, I thought that was sacrilegious, but I wanted to embody just what I got from him. But I'm Jamie.
And this is Man Enough.